Welcome to our new podcast from FitMe. We want to talk about the Mobile Growth Summit we've visited in the last week. Benjamin, can you tell us some impression you had?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, actually, I had the honor to host it. So I wanted to host that Mobile Growth Summit, and I hosted like 6 panels, and it was very fascinating. It was very interesting. I mean, obviously, since it's called Mobile Growth Summit, it's all about growth. So it's very heavy on performance tactics, performance marketing. But I've also met a really interesting gentleman from Germany, Oliver Kern. He works for a company called Abacan Life, and that's a little bit like Second Life, probably a game you remember, or almost a little bit like Sims, and it's heavy on fashion. It's heavy on sort of like translating the real world to the virtual one. So you have a ton of fashion in there. You have like influencers in there. You have people designing clothes in there. They sell a shitload of merchandise, a shitload of in-game items, like 2.5 million items a day, actually told me. So that was very interesting for me because he told me a lot about, kind of like in this panel, he told me a lot about organic scaling versus performance. So basically how you leverage Instagram as a social media channel to sort of grow, and how to sort of integrate your community and what kind of tools they developed to enable their community to actually do that. And I think that was a very fascinating thing, because typically companies don't give their community so much room to sort of like represent their brand. They typically do it themselves, and I thought that was a very interesting idea. And I mean, obviously it works, so I think that's great. And I think that's certainly something we can talk about a little bit later. But I think it was very interesting because it sparked a lot of conversations around Mobile Growth Summit, and later on LinkedIn around the whole sort of digital fashion industry. Because when you think about it, like when someone spends 100 hours in the next GTA, let's say GTA 6 that might come out in the next years, why not give them the opportunity to buy a James Bond watch from Omega, or like a cool suit from Hugo Boss or whatever, right? Like or a lady could wear a nice Prada purse or a nice Louis Vuitton purse. So I feel like that's something that's certainly interesting, and I mean, obviously really interesting for us as FitMe as well, because we have this stock exchange for in-game items. And like we just sort of said in the beginning of this, before we record this podcast, like in-game items don't have to be just about, you know, swords and armor and this kind of like traditional sort of like hardcore gaming items, but they could actually be fashion outfits, for example. What do you think about that?
Fashion has been a really big trend, and due to COVID, a lot of these large brands have to rethink their strategy. But did you pick up any other trend? Like, for example, when we talked with that fashion customer, he said there are a lot more women come into gaming. Does that is related to fashion, or what is your opinion on that?
Totally, I think it's very interesting that everything has to be like digitized. I mean, I've sort of have a couple of clients in the fashion world, and I talk a lot with them. I mean, obviously, if you talk about luxury brands, typically people love to buy luxury in the right environment. So it's very heavy on sort of like the right feel. Like you typically want to go to a Louis Vuitton store to buy a Louis Vuitton bag because you want to have this experience. It's very heavy on the experience economy, so to speak. People don't like to buy luxury goods online typically. So I think that's why they sort of have to rethink a lot of things. And I mean, obviously, I think it's also interesting if you think about a couple of trends that we see, just like Gucci did like a watch with Fanatic, for example, and it sold out immediately. It was a $2,500 watch, I believe, or €2,500. And I think that's something interesting. And I mean, certainly, I feel like COVID has led to just more time for people, right? I mean, typically people in the fashion industry are super busy because there are fashion shows everywhere. Typically, luxury just works, right? Typically, it's a very good way to literally just make your revenue, and you don't have to think about the box too many. But now people have to do that, and like you said, we had this really interesting talk by this gentleman from Activision, Joan, and he said that basically they did their market research. He's a global head of market research, and he said that like 50% of women are sort of like their client base, and I mean they play a lot of Candy Crush, for example, or other games, and I think we have this two sort of like two big categories. I mean, when I think about my friends, for example, like most of them, they either play like hyper casual games or they play hardcore games. They play Call of Duty, for example, when we talk about Activision. But yeah, I think it's if you look at Asia, typically Asia is a really good sort of indicator of what's to come in Europe. Like typically they're like, I would say 5 to 10 years ahead of us in terms of technology. That's something you can, for example, think about smartphones. Like typically they have like smartphone technology 5 years ago that we now have. And Louis Vuitton, for example, sold their first capsule collection in Asia, in China, in League of Legends, and it was very successful. And I believe this is a very interesting model because sort of like luxury companies have found out that, you know, when someone loves a brand, they want to like have this brand affiliate with them in the game as well. They want to show that. And I think the more games we see where people spend a lot of time in, like I said, like a GTA, like a League of Legends, like you know, all of those games that are very heavy represented on YouTube, for example, or on Twitch, where you spend hundreds of hours on it. It would totally make sense for people and for brands to come in and give people the opportunity to represent their brand, buy their brand, and yeah, I mean, just Stefan Opitz, head of partnerships, just said would be super smart from Porsche, for example, to offer like a digital version of their car in a game. I mean, they do it for branding. I think that's always something interesting to think about in marketing. Typically, you have these kind of like ladder that marketers climb up, and it starts as branding, right? Like, for example, Porsche just got into Cyberpunk 2077. Like, they will have one of their older Porsche models represent in the game, and it's also sort of like a big branding move, and it's not a sales move. And now I think everyone has done branding in esports and gaming from the big companies, but not a lot of people have found sales cases. And so I think this will be next sort of frontier for the industry. I think that's something where it becomes really big, right? Because I mean, obviously, if you're a marketer, you just need like a marketing budget, and it's just about branding, and you can say, okay, we can increase brand loyalty over a certain percentage. We can increase customer loyalty, we can increase brand awareness, which is very important, I think, for most companies. But the moment you can increase sales, that's where it becomes really interesting, and where typically the big budgets get shifted into gaming. So yeah, I totally see that as no new frontier. And I mean, it would be a huge thing, not just for men, but for women as well, of course, because we all love to sort of buy items. And I think we're all very, you know, like, not so different in that category. Like, I think we all love luxury. We all love to buy certain goods, and why not represent them and rock them in a game?
Benjamin, and if you're looking into the near future, what kind of cases could you imagine? What kind of brands? What kind of sale pitch? What kind of new items which might be accepted on the market very soon, and bring revenue as well, of course?
Yeah, like I said, I think it works well. It works especially well in a game that's like a GTA that is basically faucet in real world. I think it's very difficult. It's much more difficult to do it in League of Legends, to be honest, because League of Legends obviously is a high fantasy game, and it's very difficult to sort of translate a brand like Mont Blanc or Rolex or, I don't know, Omega to League of Legends. It doesn't really make sense for them. But if you have a game that is fostered in the real world, it would be really interesting, and I think it would be a very smart case. For example, you have this beautiful Omega watch from James Bond, No Time to Die, and if you want to sell it, why not sell a digital version of it in the next GTA or the next game that is like this? Maybe next Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs Legion, for example, now is also in a futuristic version, so it probably doesn't work. But like I said, if you have more games that are sort of set in our timeline, that's a perfect indicator for them, a perfect world and a perfect brand environment typically. And obviously it has to be a good brand fit for them. I think that's what they're looking for. It's not easy. I mean, we see it a lot in sports where it's probably the easiest to do, right? I mean, Nike, for example, sells a lot of digital items in NBA 2K, for example. Like, they brought I had a good conversation with the head of esports, and they are currently designing both. They sort of bring their brand into gaming on a physical basis, which is, for example, Travis Scott. They designed a shoe with Travis Scott. It became quite famous around Fortnite, like sort of like a gamer shoe, but not not really a gamer shoe, but more like a Travis Scott styled Fortnite shoe in the physical world. But they also sell a lot of their current lineup, basically, all the basketball shoes you can think about, LeBron shoes and these kind of things in NBA 2K. So I think it's just a very interesting time, and it's very smart to build these new revenue channels, especially in COVID times, because like you just told me before the podcast, I mean, I think a lot of companies have seen their sales go down, especially if they're very heavy on retail, and if they're very heavy on the retail experience, and they're used to people coming more to their store versus just buying something digitally. So I think it would be very smart to do that. I think that's probably the future. I mean, I hope we can help with that as FitMe, because obviously, like I said in the beginning, I think it's very interesting when we have these conversations that typically when we think about in-game items, everyone just thinks about the sword from World of Warcraft, or like the potion, or I don't know, like some currency, or some neurons or something from No Man's Sky, or from like traditional gaming items, like economic items. But why not bring in fashion items? Why not bring in other categories in it as well? And I think the whole industry can grow massively out of it.
Yeah, sure. I think that too, because we're very much concentrated on the gaming side, but we also seen big increase in the collectibles. I mean, if you look at crypto kitties or these kind of things, we have amazing price increase, and we have amazing awareness increase. What do you think about that?
Totally. I mean, I can only go back to this sort of example that I kind of love, like this James Bond watch. Like, I mean, if you think about it, like we're in a Daniel Craig era, but like 10 years from now, there will be no Daniel Craig movies anymore, right? There will be new James Bond, and there will be, I could imagine such a watch in digital form would rise in value massively, because people in 10 years will watch Daniel Craig movies again, and then be like, oh, that's cool movies. I want to have something like that, right? Like, typically when something gets rare, it has more value, and obviously that's something we can translate to esports. Riot Games, they create every year these beautiful skins for sort of like the champions. Basically, the two teams that make it to the grand finals, they get their own skins. And I visited Riot Games once at the headquarters and met the designers, and they put a lot of effort into this. And people buy them and wear them with pride, because I mean, obviously they want to represent their team. But yeah, I mean, certainly something like this will rise in value like a piece of art. And I totally see this will be a new economy.
And how do you think that will be reflected in the business of FitMe?
Yes, I think what we talk a lot about internally and with like our stakeholders, kind of like I guess our aim has to be to sort of like teach people how to catch their own fish, right? It's all about like education. It's about showing people the opportunities that we can present with gaming, with FitMe, with trading, right? I think it's this whole universe that will open to you. Like, for example, when I got into Bitcoin trading, I think 5 years ago, then all of a sudden you sort of get educated on it, and you can make your profits, and you can make passive income. It's a wonderful thing. I think in general, I mean, that's probably something a lot of people have heard, but passive income is probably the best thing you can do for your career, because all of a sudden you don't have to work as hard as you want anymore. You can just sort of generate some income on the side, and this is something we can do with FitMe, right? And I totally believe that when we launch and people will get to know about FitMe, they'll be like, wait a second, I should really take a hard look at like 10 years or 20 years of my gaming. What kind of items do I have? Right? Because we all play so much, we all spend so much time in these games, and we typically have like thousands of items. And very often you probably don't even play these games anymore. Maybe it's something like a Guild Wars or whatever that you don't play anymore, but then you look at YouTube and Guild Wars is still huge, right? And then you're like, well, I mean, I don't play this game anymore. I probably don't need this item anymore, but someone else will really value this item, so they will pay a lot of money for it. And all of a sudden I can sort of, basically, for example, finance my own gaming habits with it. That's something we talked about which I think is interesting. If you think about like next gen consoles and like PlayStation 5, for example, games get a bit more expensive, and people probably looking for how can I finance the next, I don't know, like my Spider-Man, Miles Morales, or my next PS5 or whatever. And that's would be awesome, right? I mean, I think that's something I would love people to do. I would love people to, once we launch, hopefully in Christmas, around Christmas or a little bit later, to sort of just have a look at the gaming library, be like, man, I have like a shitload of items. I can just put them on FitMe, I can sell them, and I can afford whatever I want. Maybe I want to go to holiday, that's cool. Maybe I want to afford a PS5, that's cool. Maybe I want to reinvest it in other games. Maybe I want to reinvest in other items because I'm going hardcore on World of Warcraft Shadowlands again, and I wanna have the lead for it there, right?
Thank you, Benjamin. That was a great insights of the summit we had. The fashion is definitely one of the hot shit coming next, and we are looking forward to trade it on FitMe Exchange. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Absolutely. See you. Bye.